Okay, so this is the video on using algebra. Now, obviously, I mean, you have entire courses on algebra that take an entire semester. So I won't be able to teach you every single thing about using algebra. But luckily in chemistry, typically what you're trying to do is take an equation and solve for a variable in a pretty, not easy I wouldn't say, because it can be difficult if you don't know what you're doing, but a pretty simple way. So there's not a lot of complicated stuff. And so I think what I'm going to do for this video is just work some problems so you can kind of see how I work them and get a general sense. And then if you're still kind of struggling with algebra or don't feel very comfortable, maybe go pick up a book and kind of read it, or you're welcome to ask me questions and just get some practice. You can get stuff off the internet and stuff. But again, nothing overly complicated, pretty much just plugging into an equation, sometimes converting units like we did last chapter, and then just going from there. So let's go ahead and work a couple problems. I'll just kind of make these up on the fly. So let's start out with something pretty simple here. How about, so we'll do this, okay? So as I said in the worksheet, when you're working with algebra, you want to isolate this variable, this x here. And by isolate, I mean you want to get it on the left or the right hand side of the equation, all by itself, okay? And so everything that you do, you're working towards that goal. And the only other thing to remember is whatever you do to the left side, you also do to the right. And so we'll kind of follow that along. So the first thing we want to do here, we need to get rid of this 50, and we need to get rid of this minus 1, okay? So let's go ahead and get rid of this minus 1 first from the left-hand side. So to get rid of a minus 1, obviously you add 1. And again, we can't just go adding 1 to the left-hand side of this equation. That doesn't make any sense. That would change the problem. So we need to do whatever we do over here as well. So let's go ahead and add 1. So when we do that, this goes to 0. We then have 50x equals, and then 5 plus 1 is 6. Okay? So that's our next step. Now we need to get rid of this 50 that's sitting here. This is 50x is like 50 times x, right? We just don't write the multiplication sign in there. So to get rid of a 50, when you're doing 50 times x, you're going to divide by 50, right? Because 50 divided by 50 is 1, and 1 times x is just x, okay? So we'll divide 50 over here, and again we need to divide 50 over here, okay? So 50 over 50 is 1, right? And 1 times x is just x. And 6 divided by 50, I'll just go ahead and put it down like that. You could just plug that into your calculator if you wanted to. And so there's the problem, okay? So that was a pretty simple one. You need to be able to do this kind of in your sleep, okay? So always remember, you're going to either, like when you have a term that's added or subtracted that's not involving the x, you're going to want to add or subtract on both sides to get rid of it. When you have a term to get it to 0, when you have a term that's like multiplied or divided within the x, then you're going to multiply or divide to get rid of it, just like you saw here. So let's do another example here. Let's get a little bit more complicated. Let's see, 25x minus 3x plus 4 equals 7. How about? Okay? So it's a little bit more complicated, but again, pretty much the same. So we have our x's over here, and we're going to want to get them all by themselves, right? So let's go ahead and get rid of this 4 here first. It's a plus 4, so we're going to subtract 4, and we do it to both sides, okay? So plus 4 minus 4, that's just 0, okay? Which leaves us on this side with 25x minus 3x, okay? And then on this side we have 7 minus 4, which is just 3. So that's our next step. Now on this side, we have x's on both sides, in both terms, I mean, sorry. So what we can do is we can factor the x's out, or take them away. And the way you do that is this, okay? So when you have an x in both terms, you can take the x out and leave what's there in parentheses. And to check that this works, you can always just multiply it back out, right? So this would be 25 times x minus 3 times x, because you're multiplying it by both terms. That's exactly what we had up here, so it all checks out. Okay? And that equals 3. Now 25 minus 3, that's 22. And then times the x equals 3. And then again, we want to get rid of this 22, get the x all by itself. So we're going to go ahead and divide by 22 on both sides. 22 divided by 22 is 1. And 1 times x is x. And this is just 3 divided by 22. And again, you can plug that into your calculator or leave it as a fraction. And so that's the answer there. Okay? Let's go ahead and do one that's a little bit different. Let's do one that's like this. How about x divided by 5 minus 1 equals x plus 2. Alright, let's try that. So again, we want the x's on both sides, or on isolated on one side. So whenever you have the variable on both sides, your first goal should try to be put them on the same side together. Okay? So let's go ahead. It doesn't really matter. You can put them on the left side, the right side. You just have to put them on the same side. So let's go ahead and put the x's on the left-hand side. So we need to get this x over to here. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, we can subtract an x from both sides, right? So x minus x, that's just 0. Okay? And so the right-hand side just becomes 2. 0 plus 2 is 2. And on this side, we have x over 5 minus 1 minus x, right? Okay. Now let's get rid of this pesky minus 1 here, because it's getting in the way. So we'll add 1 to both sides, because minus 1 plus 1 is just 0. So we're left on this side with x over 5 minus x. And on this side, we're left with 2 plus 1, which is 3. Okay? Now again, we have x's in both terms, so we can factor them out just like we did before. So let's go ahead and take the x outside. And that leaves us with 1/5 minus 1. And if you ever have any questions in these videos about why I did something or how I did it, just feel free to call me or email me and I can explain it in more detail. So this is what we're left with. So let's go ahead and simplify what is here in parentheses. So 1/5 minus 1 would give us minus 4/5. Right? Because 1 is like 5/5. So that's how that works out. If you have questions, just ask. And then times this x here equals 3. Okay? So that's where we're at. Now we got to get rid of this minus 4/5. So let's first get rid of this 5 in the denominator. So to get rid of the 5 down there, we are going to multiply both sides by 5. So if you multiply this by 5, multiply this by 5, 5 divided by 5 gives you 1. So you're left with minus 4x over here, and 3 times 5 is 15. Okay? Over here, we have this minus 4 we need to get rid of. So let's go ahead and divide by negative 4 on both sides. Minus 4 over 4 is 1. 1 times x is x. Minus 15 over 4. And again, we can plug that into the calculator if we want. And so that's how you do it. Now, this is more advanced than even probably what you do in chemistry. So realistically, in Gen Chem, you're going to be doing pretty simple algebra equations, to be honest with you. The hardest thing that you do is using the algebraic quadratic equation, and we'll have a whole section on using the quadratic equation. But really, when you're working with chemistry problems, it's really usually pretty simple to get the variable. The equations really aren't that hard, at least at the Gen Chem level. They can get more difficult as you get more advanced. But it's just kind of good to make sure that you really have your algebra skills down. So you should be able to do this kind of stuff here. And kind of work at it if you don't feel very comfortable with it, to kind of learn it. And like I said, ask me if you have any questions. I'll put one more video on here where I talk about actually using this in a chemistry type setting with problems. So thanks.